I actually can tell you that I've been giving training to future prison guards about LGBTI plus issues, and I found a lot of resistance. And I can tell you some of them were surprised when I was saying, yeah, there's some validity in what you say, let's talk about it. Because they think we'll go there, no, this is the way it is, and you either accept it or not. And I don't think that's the best way to go.
Hello, everyone. We are here for another episode of Color Coded. We are going to interview Rita Paulos. First, I think we could have like an introduction.
Okay, hello. First of all, thank you for having me and this opportunity to talk with you. I'm the founder of both Rede Ex Aequo and Casa Qui. Rede Ex Aequo was many years ago, or more than 20 years ago that began. Back then, my worry and what I was concerned was with the lack of support on other parts of the country besides Lisbon and Porto, although Porto was not very strong either at that time. And the project that brought the organization to life was actually written in Budapest, Hungary. They were challenging people who were there, saying, write a project till the end of the week, and something that you are diagnosing and think that it's necessary in your country. And that came instantly to my mind, we need to promote some sort of project that helps people in other places in Portugal to build up community, do peer support, and so on. And that's what I wrote and presented. And then when I came back to Portugal, I actually proposed the project and asked a few people who I knew from ILGA Portugal back then. The project actually was financed not through ILGA because it was a senior organization. We did a funding proposal with the Instituto Português da Juventude, which is the Portuguese institute, now is also sport and youth, as an informal group. So the project was for 2 years. And what we did, we decided to create a network of youth groups that would share resources, share ideas, share projects, and all under this coordination that would support them, basically. And I think it was 1 year or 3 months, 4 months after the project began, we created a non-profit formal organization. Casa Qui ends up being something that is also a consequence of Rede Ex Aequo, because we were, and still the organization is a youth-to-youth organization, so there's a age limit up to 30, and still we're not completely capable of doing what we call technical and professional intervention. So we would have to refer to other institutions and services. And what happened frequently was that people either didn't want to get help from the general services and the offices that exist to support in terms of violence, health, mental health, and so on. And when we did, things didn't go well a lot of the time. So Casa Qui, which is Instituto Particular de Solidariedade Social, meaning a private institute of social solidarity, is just solely made of people who are professionals and who are working to support people, and mainly youth, not only, but mainly youth, in situations of emergency and violence. So it's a different concept, it's a different way of working regarding Rede Ex Aequo, and it's complementing its work, meaning both are needed, both are necessary. We have 4 main services and projects. A 5th now that is integrated as well is our victim support office for LGBTI plus youth. And most of the cases we support and help, unfortunately, are family violence, so domestic violence, and that's nothing new. It's quite understandable for people who know these topics, to know what some of the challenges and difficulties that youth, LGBT plus I plus youth has. Also dating violence, also school violence, bullying, but not only, and as well when they are in situations of mental health crisis or, for instance, are homeless, which is also a phenomenon typical of this group of young people. And to complement it, we found the need to have a kind of shelter, not in the traditional terms, but shelter service. We have right now an apartment for autonomization, meaning we support young people who are homeless or victims of domestic violence or family violence to have a place to, restructure emotionally and find their own way to be autonomous financially and so on. And actually, we have 4 rooms in this apartment, and we'll be opening in a matter of 3 months, 8 new rooms in 2 other apartments. So we'll have 12 in total. We also have a bit older service, but that is now a bit more solid and not popular, but it has a lot of people searching and looking for it, which is our social clinic. So basically, we understood that quite soon that a lot of people, as I've mentioned, don't get the help they need because they're afraid to be victimized or discriminated and so on. And what we want to do basically is, while people fear it, we provide the professionals who are ethical and are prepared to deal with these issues. The other work we do, that we've been doing since the beginning, is also we do training mostly with adults and professionals that work with children and youth, teachers, commissions of protection of children, so on. And actually, they're all certified for teachers as well. And recently, because it's a really strategic area for now for us, is we're trying to work with the employment and trying to see if we get better channels to get young people to get employment in safe and inclusive jobs and places to work. And I think this is most of the biggest part of our work.
And through which platforms do like people, or for example the students of Nova, if they ever want to like participate and work with Casa Qui?
If they go to our website, we have a form for a volunteer. But I warn at first hand that we don't use volunteers that much because our work is professional, and it's a position we have that with no judgment at all. But we find that people should have qualified people doing this work. So we do have, of course, people in training with us. But if it's to give any kind of official support, we won't ask for help from volunteers. We are interested in building some kind of mentoring projects, which would have volunteers. And that's something that we're actually in conversation, for instance, with Cisco. We have young people in our apartments, and sometimes it's interesting to have people who are already in the professional world or who are seniors and have some experience, to do some kind of mentoring. Probably there's something we'll be looking into in the future. And of course, peers like students from the Business School of Economics can also be part of it, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a great idea. Having some like role models to lead the way to us. Also another question, and I think this one is important as well. I mean, could you like tell us like some tips, some tactics, and the experience of like being a director of an organization like an NGO? How is it? How to manage the organization itself?
Yeah. For me, there are some philosophies behind the way I've worked through the last 20 years. And the first of all, it's more general, and then I'll speak about the specifics, is for me, it's important that the team feels that they participate. They are part of the process and that they are heard. And also, it's important to try to match the tasks you are giving to the own vocation and satisfaction of people you're working with, because their work will be much better. For me, it's very important open communication. Okay, that in terms of team. In terms of building an organization, when you are new, you do need to be very rigorous and serious because people don't know you, and you have to gain credibility. Okay, because why would they trust you? They don't know from where you come from. They know nothing about your work. Are you trustworthy or not? So if you start doing small projects, it will be harder. But if the outcomes are good, if you're showing good results, you're showing quality is very important. Probably people will begin to trust you. The other challenge is about funding. I think Portugal is not very strong culturally on that terms. Of course, right now we do have some donations, and especially mostly of companies, but not only. But it's a weak source, in my opinion. But most of all, you have to look for funding programs. And in this area, what I suggest is go mostly for those who do specifically talk about this topic. Because if you go to general social, support, your proposal gets lost in a massive number of themes, and you never know the reception and awareness or openness from the jury to this topic. So we know very well that it's not that popular yet.
I mean, it is. I can see the problem, for example, with funding. It's really hard to divert funds for this type of like projects and causes because it is something that is still a bit overshadowed, and I can see your initial worry with like bringing activism in like with the LGBTQ community for other regions other than like Porto and Lisbon. I mean, I'm from Viana do Castelo, so I can see your point here. You've always like looking at like your academic studies. I feel like you've always tended to like have some interest in this subject, in this area. I mean, how do you feel that your, for example, your masters helped you like widening your vision about these subjects?
And that's a good question. I've always been interested in gender issues and feminisms since my first degree, which actually does talk about this. It's not something people sometimes don't know so much about the languages and culture and literature degrees. And for me, my master's has been invaluable to the work I do, mainly in training, because the way I can work with people to understand the whole questions about sex, biology, gender, social and cultural norms does, I think, become very useful for them to deconstruct a series of ideas and concepts and start understanding better the existence of other sexual orientations, of other gender expressions, gender identities, and also the intersex people, sexual characteristics. So when I do training, the work I did in my master's is very, very useful. I use it all the time, actually.
Then we're gonna move to the topic that we also wanted to like get some more insights about. So how do you feel like that it is for you to be like a woman that is like an activist for like both the feminist community and like the feminist movement and the LGBTQ activism, and how do you think that they intertwine, they intersect with each other?
I do usually think and sometimes say that I have one foot in one and one foot in the other. I don't think they always intersect, mainly because of lack of dialogue and conversation and knowledge. Actually, LGBTI plus topics are included in gender equality conceptually in Portugal, and I'm one of the people who absolutely agrees with that, because what is behind homophobia, transphobia, interphobia, biphobia, and so on is sexism as well. So the way they impact is differently. That's the whole issue. But they are connected, and it's sometimes it's even interesting, this is just a curiosity. I always start talking about in my trainings about the pay gap, and in connected that the inequality and lack of situations on the domestic and care part of the families. And when I go later to the same-sex families or same gender families, you see that the gender roles are not so present. The studies show that usually the children are taking care of both partners equally, unlike with the different sex or gender. I think we have had a lot of opportunities to learn with the feminism movements, and they have been very supportive of us, mostly. I do think that currently we do have some kind of tension and even crisis in terms of interests and not in a bad term, and I'm not using this word in a bad way, but in terms of what are the stakes in question for instance, cis women and trans women. And you know that this conversation has been going on about, the sports, about toilets and the locker rooms, and also in prisons. And so, and in myself, because I do have a deep knowledge of both topics and areas, for me, it's not so easy to take either position. And I think the way forward is for both groups to sit down and talk. Because you cannot just say, oh, my problems are more important than yours. I think that's not the way it works. I think we have to hear what are the fears and the troubles and the difficulties of each group and why they are wanting change or avoiding change. And then find a way that both groups are safe. Because for me, it's very hard when a cis woman, and actually I know people who were assaulted in a public bathroom, okay, to say, but I'm afraid, what do you do with that, Of course, there are trans women who will go anyway to the women's bathroom because they pass, that's not the whole issue. But it doesn't change that we do have to take in consideration, in account also this fear from cis women. And probably the solution for the bathrooms could be something that takes in account that as well. And most of all, it's just not that. If you get people to understand and feel that they are being taken in account, everyone will be feeling better and the things will result better. It won't be there's much backlash, won't be as much resistance, because when people don't understand why things are being changed and feel they are being imposed on them, it will be harder for everyone, in us as well. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, first, I have this feeling that you can like build a community like with like a purpose related to activism, and you can feel like you are belonging there and you're like in a community in a sense.
Yeah.
But I feel like most communities tend to like close themselves, and then when you try to like have this dialogue with other communities, there's always this like backlash, you know. So I really can see that problem here, because I think we could like strive for like greater achievements if we listen to like other communities. And even inside communities, sometimes you have like these boundaries, these barriers between like some like different groups, and it's really hurtful. I would say it builds upon like a huge inertia, and I think that's a problem to be like solved, if we want to like be listened and make changes. So I would love to like hear your solutions and your opinions, because most probably, even if like they end up not being perfect or not perfectly implemented, they can merge with other ideas and build on something greater. So
I agree absolutely. Most of all, and that's a practice that's being used more and more, not by everyone, but in politics, for instance, in governmental, they hear the the stakeholders and the people who are of interest, and it's the only way to do things better. There's no other way. If you do things without listening to people, yes, like you said, you end up sometimes with completely something that is not matching what is necessary, not working. And in terms of conversation, you really, I think, for me, for instance, a few years ago, I tried to open up a conversation with some people in our movement about some of the difficulties and issues, and they didn't want to talk. It brought them discomfort. And then I said, okay, if you don't want to talk, don't talk, that's fine. But the thing is, I work with the real people. I'm giving training to people in Viana do Castelo. I'll be there actually this year. And talking with people in the stores and Madeira and so on. And these are the people who are working with everybody day-to-day basis. And I want them to have things making sense in their head. And for it to work, I have to listen to what are their point of view, the way they think, and to deconstruct or not, or give them another point of view, or bring some facts to help maybe deconstruct what's going on. And I don't think you get anywhere without it, anywhere at all without this. And what I feel is that, you know, I actually can tell you that I've been giving training to future prison guards the past week, and we'll be doing the last classes tomorrow about LGBTI plus issues. And I found a lot of resistance, and there's a difference. Usually people, when they come to the trainings, they're open and interested. They are forced because it's part of their course. And I can tell you, some of them were surprised when I was saying, yeah, there's some validity in what you say, let's talk about it. Because they think we'll go there, no, this is the way it is, and you either accept it or not. And I don't think that's the best way to go. Basically, you were talking about how we do this, right? How we get the groups, it's basically talking. And when we don't agree, try to find a way to see if we don't step on each other's toes, maybe. And also in groups, there's a tendency always, because it's human nature, for someone to say, oh, this is the right way to be gay. This is the right way to be trans. You know, and we also have to resist this because it's the same kind of logic that is used against us from outside. So we do really, I think, have to be aware and resist this.
Exactly. That there are some like mistakes, or there are some like fallacies on the way that we structure our like organization, and I think that most of the times we fail on the way we make judgments as well. I think that is like something that is to be worked on, but I agree with you. One of the main problems that society itself has is the lack of like true communication skills. I feel like people think that uh, learning how to communicate is only like speaking to like a huge audience or something like that, or being like really fluent, etc. But no, it's about empathy, it's about listening, it's about knowing how to take criticism and how to evaluate it, and many other things. And I feel like it is something that is failing here, on society itself, not only in our community. How do what's the feeling? So what are the how I would say the obstacles for like um LGBTQ women in society, women on society, for example? How do you feel that there are some like struggles that you face based on like your gender and having like a different sexuality?
When they compare different sex or different gender couples with same-sex couples, either male or men, and female and women, the poorest were the women from the three. And it makes sense if there's a pay gap, if the core feminine jobs are lower paid, that would happen. Also, there's an old issue that is getting better regarding visibility. You know, men have always been seen as the leaders and the ones that show up and are in public life. And usually this kind of gender bias and gender structures also happen in organizations. They also sometimes say, yes, we are very inclusive, but then all the leaders are men or male people. So that's also something that has to be done, an effort. And also the whole issue of women in general, being less outspoken because they are not trained as much since children to be outspoken, because it's all the nurture and caring and so on. And also for sometimes also the questions about issues regarding, gynecology, parenting and so on were also very viewed as female and also not as much male, even though it's not completely true. That's also a gender rule and sort of that is still perpetuated. I think things are better. I'm telling you in a 25-year perspective, of course, that I can give you. Things are much more improved. And I don't think you should feel bad if that is the situation, for instance, that you have or an organization. I just think in this topic, as in other kind of diversity characteristics, you just have to make an effort to see, are we being inclusive enough? Are we having representation of different groups? When I was in Rede Ex Aequo, I talked about, gynecologists and doctors on that part. And we did create a list of people who were friendly and wouldn't discriminate, because we realized that a lot of girls were not going because of that. And then later, a colleague of ours in our board said to us, so how about men? Men also need to go to the urologist. We have to make a list. And that didn't even come to my mind. So everyone can do this. It's just we have to make an effort to be more aware and then have a diverse group. Because they'll say, well, you are forgetting this, which is a need I or the people like me have. And that's, I think, how we can go with that. Not think we have to know everything. We cannot know what we don't know as well.
Yeah, I feel like, as you said, you might face like a struggle, for example, in the LGBTQ community, that you can feel a higher weight on, for example, queer men rather than like queer women, but still it's like a struggle that is shared, so it exists for like both genders. But sometimes you focus on the gender that is like getting hit like the hardest, and you forget about the other one. I feel like that's a problem that exists. And sometimes when you like speak about this, either like women or men, and they say, oh wait, this is the problem that I share as well, that it exists for me. It isn't like as big, but it exists. People like sometimes tend to like get offensive and slash defensive about that, because they think it's we are like speaking and saying something like, oh, you shouldn't like be talking about this because I'm feeling this too. No, it's about, this is a problem you face, but it's a problem that I also face. Let's find a solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, and actually, yes, I think, maybe sometimes I feel I'm getting old, but this whole thing about the trigger as well, I think we're going a bit overboard because sometimes we don't let people talk. I mean, not to be offensive, people should not be offensive and respect. That's not the issue, but people should be able to say, this is important to me, even if it's triggering something in you. One example of what you just mentioned initially is the pregnancy surrogacy. No one is talking about it for men or male people. So, and that's important because actually, and people sometimes say, oh, but no, but and I understand that point of view. The female body is being used and objectified. Yes, okay, you can have that standpoint, but the moment that it's allowed for some people, why not for others? And when I talked about parenting and actual reproduction, the rights were much more focused, because it's also true there were more same-sex couples of females that were interested in it, and of course it was important to allow them. But I know many men, not in the dozens, but I do know that go to the US and other countries to get a pregnancy surrogacy. And actually, it's happening the same that happened with us, lesbians and bisexual women and pansexual women with females, was that we had the people who had the means and the money would go abroad, and the other wouldn't have a chance. And that's happening the same with men and male people.
Then the follow-up question that I was gonna make was about that. I mean, there are struggles that are more like focused in like different groups, and you have like different types of like prejudice. So I believe that for example, being like a queer woman, you have like this layer of like prejudice in society and disadvantages that you get from like your gender, and then you have like another one on top of that with your sexuality, right?
Yes.
So that's how I see it, almost like a pyramid, you know. And then at least on my mind.
Yeah.
And so the question I was gonna make is that, for example, being a woman, you will get faced with, for example, the pay gap, sure, right? But also being queer, you may face, for example, barriers of entry in companies and jobs. So would you say that that is a possible also explanation for like uh for example a lower like income for like same sex
Yeah.
single couples?
Yes, it could be. Of course, this is just theoretical, but for sure there's some impact, and we know that the statistics that we have on discrimination and in employment show that LGBTI plus people, including females or trans women, it's probably I cannot even compare. But yes, I do think that could be a very logical explanation of why, you know, you also have the being two women and then the income of the two is lower. And then also because if they are open, of course they have to be open, or there to be a suspicion in their job, they may also be in a situation where, for instance, they won't get promoted, they won't get raised in terms of their salary or income. In terms of entry level, that when you go to a job interview, it will also depend on what they ask, and of course it's not even legal to ask a few questions that some people think that it's possible, like if you're getting married, if you're thinking about having children, that is not actually allowed, but some companies do nonetheless. But I think some people, in terms of the entry level, will be discriminated mostly based on gender expression, and that goes abroad all groups. Either if you're not actually, you can be a heterosexual person and have a non-conforming or what we call non-normative gender expression. So, but that usually is the way that people are disadvantaged in terms of employment, because it's visible. And the other situation we can choose not to be visible. You know, we can lie, we can omit, we can, and actually for a female to say I don't plan to have children, it's like hooray. Of course the idea will be there nonetheless, or maybe you'll change your mind, or maybe you'll find someone, and then so I would describe it as different problems in different levels. When you are getting trying to get a job, and when you're already in the job, there will be different issues at stake.
So yeah, I feel like this is a problem, and as you also said, even if it may not be, for example, like a barrier of entry, at least here in Portugal, because we have like strong legislation like supporting the workers. It might be like a huge problem when it comes to like progression. So it is already, we already know that it's really hard for like women to like get some like progression in their career inside the company. So then not being then by being non-normative, it goes to another level. So that is one of like my concerns, because it touches like the problem of like your identity, I would say. And I feel like someone's identity is something that isn't harmful at all. But the first thing that comes to my mind is, how can I educate people to like open up and understand this? How can I like give them like good like sources of information? Because I feel like many times you may like bring good sources of information that are really reliable. For example, people saying that being queer is like a mental illness, and even if you like give them all the sources of information, they will still make this statement. So this is the problem that I wish I could like live better with, and I would like get some like insights of like how to dealing with this, because it's kind of hard.
I usually work on this, and it's also what I work with people, that it's a question of how we view things and what is normal and what is not normal. And actually, that's what I find valuable about Judith Butler's writings. In queer theory, I don't use most of it, but this one is important. And actually, she brought focus to this, but this is not the only area, but she brought it to our issues. It also has a lot to do with philosophy of science and how we look at reality and things and how we describe them. And I usually, not in a simplistic way, because I do some work in terms of conversation with the people in training, but I try to show them other ways, and people, which there are variants, which are not the dominant, are not the persistent ones, but in itself, they don't mean anything wrong. How we look at things and what is normal and is not normal can be seen, and in my opinion, should be seen as something that is relative. So what I try to, for instance, I say ginger people or red hair people are not the most frequent. Does that mean they have a problem? Albino people are not frequent. Does that mean they have a problem? Left-handed people are not majority. Does that mean they have a problem? And then I also talk about this, and I know I can understand that in point of view, if everybody were same sex or same gender attracted, there would be less babies and less reproduction. But first of all, most people who have this sexual orientation or these sexual orientations are not infertile. They can get pregnant. And actually, there's this story I tell, which is true, and it's kind of crazy. I don't tell it all the time, but when it makes sense. Some years ago, our channel, RTP2, was showing an animal documentary, but with bonobo monkeys. And that community right there, they had a very particular behavior. And the females, they would partner with another female during most of the year, and they had sex with them. They were their life partners. And then when mating season arrived, they would have sex with the males, have the offspring, and then bring them do the bringing with the female. And this is kind of crazy. No one is proposing this, but just showing that the fact that people are same-sex attracted or same-gender attracted doesn't mean that there won't be more people in terms of offspring or of reproduction. Of course, there will be much less. But then I also tell you, it's not the dominant one. You know, most people are heterosexual, so you don't have really in reality anything to worry about. And actually there's a social benefit. And also explain them to them. If you look at this, if people in their relationships won't be in a situation where it will be as easy to reproduce, they will be, if they choose not to do it voluntarily and, you know, consciously, they have much more chances to, rightly, to take care of the children of other people who cannot do it. And so, for instance, and I always tell this example, in Belgium, they basically they legalized marriage in 2004 and adoption in 2005. In 2007, 2 years after, half of the adoptions were by same-sex couples or same-gender couples. And that shows how the invaluable contribution that, you know, the fact that we cannot reproduce so easily has a benefit. So it depends on your point of view. And also to understand that, you know, there's always been variations in any kind of species in ours as well. And that's okay. How we look at it is that is not okay or okay. Because of course, and I recognize, you know, what brings more babies is heterosexuality. Yeah, there's no discussion about it. But the fact that exists other variants doesn't mean anything for our species, full stop. And then the natural thing that is not natural, there's hundreds of species who have this behavior. So it's not even something that is exclusive of our species. And even in terms of reproduction, we have so many ways in that so many species reproduce, and it's all a question of what the development in terms of biology happened to be. And okay, in our species, we do need sperm, we need oocytes or eggs, and we need a healthy person with an uterus. That's the truth. So basically, I think what we have to acknowledge is, but then say there's no problem really. And what is natural? What you decide is natural, or what exists in nature. If it exists in nature, it's natural.
Yeah, exactly. Many times people overshadow, for example, adoption, which is also an option. You have like sperm banks, for example, and many other resources and ways of like having children. So it is you don't need to like be in an heterosexual relationship to like take care of a child. So there is like that is an argument that I can't like give reasoning to. A child needs to have like a mother and a father. A child can have like two fathers or two mothers and be raised in like a healthy way and be like a successful individual or like an important asset for civilization itself. So I think it really goes against and it proves that we don't need to like have both genders that are in the equation to reproduce to like actually take care of an offspring.
No, you just have to have functional, healthy people.
Exactly.
And that's also what I say. Yeah.
It's more about the division of the tasks and doing them in the right way than anything else. It's about love, care, and compassion, and you can get everything uh, from like any human that wants to like give those to you. So and it's capable of.
I think there's a consensus right now in scientific research that usually what causes suffering and pain is losing the caretakers. And so it's not as much of someone who's never been there. It's the ones that were there and they're not there anymore. And I talk about this because people also, I understand biology is important. I never say that it's not. I'm sorry, I don't have that opinion. It does matter, it exists, even for health issues. But the data I have, about 30% of the children who are conceived through donation do want to know the origins. And that's understandable, that's okay. But doesn't matter in itself in terms of what the studies has shown, because you do need the people who are always there. And it's usually that what gives different results or not. And so if you are cared for, if you have your needs satisfied in terms of your... So if they've always had the same caretakers, that gives a lot of protection and comfort. So that's the whole issue, and it goes along what you've said. Yeah.
So my final question will be, how could you like describe the fulfillment and the journey of like everything that activism brought to you? Experiences, knowledge, personal growth, like a overview or like a resume.
Well, activism became a really important part of my life, of course. And I ended up doing it professionally, so that tells a lot. I mean, sometimes I think, if I wasn't a lesbian, probably my life would have been very different from what it is. I would be doing something else professionally, I think. But that's fine. I'm really satisfied and happy with the work I'm allowed to do. I don't think I'll be here for many, many more years. I'm feeling some need to change. But I'd like to close some projects and, consolidate and then hand on to someone else or some other people what I've been doing here. But, it has also to do with my personality. I'm not a very combative person in terms of dealing with people, and I choose my battles. I do battle, but I choose them. And of course, I know that sometimes we are angry and sometimes things need to have some anger from our side, and show this is not right. But I think there are moments where you have to be angry, but a lot of others, the strategic way to go to have success probably won't be like that. I think we've gone much further in Portugal because we did the work of awareness with the agents and the people who could do the change. And I know that some people are very worried, and there's reason to be worried. I don't think we should just say, oh, nothing will happen. But I'm maybe a bit more trusting. I hope I'm wrong, and life and future won't show me I'm wrong. But I'm a bit more trusting that in the end, we'll go on with this progression, which has always been positive. I mean, there will probably be a possibility of going back, but I think we'll go further again. And I think we have to do what we're doing, which is, bringing awareness, education, training, talking with people. Visibility is important. You don't have a moral obligation to be visible, but when you are impacting people around you. And Alport actually has shown that when people know someone from a minority, the chances that they will discriminate other people with the same characteristics decreases, because the emotional side is that, is there. I mean, I was a teenager and young person when we had nothing and people would not talk about it at all. So it was taboo. It was, no one would be out in schools. So we've gone a long way. So let's go on and try to do it, sometimes fighting with fists, but other ways maybe it's more important to talk and be smart and see who are the persons where I should waste my energy with, trying to show them another way to look at these things and these issues.
I mean, yeah, I think it was like great advice. We need to like choose the right battles, always being respectful. And I think it was like a great message to keep thriving and working on these issues. So I think we wrap up here.
Okay.
It was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for like sharing your time.
Thank
And
you
I
too.
believe it will be like extremely resourceful to the listeners of the podcast. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, goodbye.
Bye.